The Mafia boss found her, begging outside his club, and whispered, "Marry me, little one." The wind off Lake Michigan did not just blow, it bit. It had teeth, sharp and jagged, tearing through the thin layers of fabric Valentina Ruiz had wrapped around her trembling frame. Chicago in January was a death sentence for the unprepared, and Valentina was less than unprepared. She was erased. She stood in the shadows of the alleyway adjacent to Club Umbra, pressing her spine against the rough brick wall as if the stone could offer warmth. It could not. Her feet were bare. She had lost her shoes 3 blocks back when a group of intoxicated men had chased her from her previous resting spot under the L train tracks. Now, her toes were numb, turning a terrifying shade of bluish-white against the dirty slush of the sidewalk. Music thrummed through the brick against her back. It was a deep, rhythmic bass, the heartbeat of the city's underworld. Inside, there was heat. Inside, there was liquor that cost more than she had earned in her entire life. Inside, there were people who belonged somewhere. Valentina wrapped her arms around herself, her teeth chattering with a violence that made her jaw ache. She did not beg often. She tried to stay invisible. But tonight, the cold was a living thing, and it was killing her. She needed enough for a cup of coffee, just to sit inside a 24-hour diner for 30 minutes, just to feel her fingers again. The heavy steel door of the club's private exit swung open. A blast of warm, scented air hit the alley, smelling of expensive cologne and cigar smoke. Valentina flinched, shrinking back into the darkness, her instinct to flee warring with her frozen limbs. 3 men stepped out. 2 were large, their movements heavy with the weight of concealed weapons. They scanned the alley with practiced paranoia. The 3rd man walked between them. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal wool coat that fit his broad shoulders with architectural precision. He did not look around with paranoia. He looked around with ownership. This was Dominic Vascari, the king of Chicago, the man who whispered orders that toppled empires. Dominic pulled a pair of black leather gloves from his pocket, his expression one of bored irritation. The meeting inside had been tedious. The Greeks were asking for too much territory, and he was growing tired of the endless negotiation. He wanted silence. He wanted the cold bite of the air to clear the scent of stale tobacco from his lungs. "Bring the car around," Dominic said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth but with an edge that suggested disobedience would be painful. "Yes, boss," one of the guards grunted, moving toward the black SUV idling at the curb. Dominic stood alone for a moment, adjusting his cufflinks. He turned his head, his dark eyes scanning the periphery of his domain. He stopped. Movement in the shadows caught his attention. It was not the movement of an assassin. It was too small, too jagged. He narrowed his eyes, taking a step toward the alley. "Hey," he called out. It was not a greeting. It was a command. Valentina froze. Her breath hitched in her throat. She should run. She had to run, but her legs refused to obey. She peeled herself from the brick wall, stepping partially into the halo of the amber street lamp. Dominic Vascari had seen many things in his 32 years. He had seen men beg for their lives. He had seen betrayal in the eyes of brothers. He had seen the light leave a man's eyes. But he had never seen anything quite like the creature standing before him now. She was a ghost. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, marred by grime on her cheek. Her hair was a tangled curtain of dark silk, wet with snow, but it was her feet that arrested him, bare, bleeding slightly where the ice had cut the skin, and her eyes. They were wide, terrified, and the color of shattered amber. Dominic felt a strange sensation in the center of his chest, a tightness he could not name. He walked toward her, ignoring the sudden return of his bodyguard. "Marco." "Boss, wait," Marco warned, his hand drifting to his jacket. "Could be a setup, a distraction." Dominic ignored him. He stopped 3 feet from Valentina. He loomed over her, blocking the wind with his massive frame. Up close, she looked even more fragile, as if a strong gust would scatter her like ashes. "What are you doing here?" Dominic demanded. His tone was harsh, accustomed to intimidation, but he saw her flinch, and for the first time in a decade, he regretted his tone. Valentina looked up at him. She saw the danger in him. It rolled off him like heat waves, the scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the set of his jaw, the way he stood perfectly still. He was a predator, but he was also the only source of heat in the entire world. Her voice cracked. It was hoarse from disuse and dehydration. She cleared her throat, wrapping her thin cardigan tighter around her chest. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I'll leave." "You are barefoot," Dominic stated, looking down at the snow. "In January." "I lost them," she whispered. "You lost your shoes?" He looked back at her face, searching for the lie. Addicts lied, spies lied, everyone lied. But the misery etched into her features was too raw to be manufactured. "Why are you standing outside my club?" he asked again, softer this time, though still demanding. Valentina shivered, a full-body convulsion that made her knees knock together. She looked at the ground, unable to meet his intense stare. "I have nowhere else to go." The words hung in the frigid air between them. "I have nowhere else to go." It was a simple sentence, but it sliced through Dominic's indifference with the precision of a scalpel. He looked at the way her hands clutched her arms, the blue tint of her lips. He had millions of dollars in the bank. He owned half the city, and this girl was freezing to death 5 feet from his door. Marco stepped up beside him. "Boss, the car is ready. Let's go. She's just a stray." Dominic's head snapped toward Marco. The look he gave his second-in-command was terrifying in its silence. Marco took a step back, bowing his head. "She is not a stray," Dominic murmured. He turned back to Valentina. He extended a hand, not touching her, but gesturing toward the open door of the club. "Come inside." Valentina's eyes widened. "What?" "Inside," Dominic repeated. "Now, before you freeze to death on my pavement. It's bad for business." It was a lie. He didn't care about business, and he just couldn't walk away. "I can't," she stammered, terrified of what might happen behind those doors. "I can't pay to get in." Dominic let out a short, dry sound that might have been a laugh if it had any humor in it. "I own the place. Come on." When she hesitated, he took off his charcoal coat. The silk lining flashed in the light. Before she could protest, he draped it over her shoulders. The weight of it nearly buckled her knees. It was heavy, warm, and smelled like cedar and power. "Walk," he ordered. She walked. The transition from the alley to the interior of Club Umbra was like stepping onto another planet. The noise was the first thing that hit her. The bass vibrated in her teeth. The lights were low, shifting in hues of violet and deep crimson. Beautiful people in silk dresses and tailored suits laughed, drank, and danced. Dominic did not take her through the main crowd. He guided her with a hand hovering near the small of her back, never quite touching, steering her through a labyrinth of corridors until the music faded to a dull thrum. He opened a door to an office. It was quiet here. The room was lined with mahogany bookshelves and leather furniture. A fire crackled in a gas fireplace on the far wall. "Sit," Dominic commanded, pointing to a plush leather armchair near the fire. Valentina sank into the chair. The heat from the fire hit her frozen skin, causing a stinging sensation that made her gasp. She pulled Dominic's coat tighter around herself, burying her nose in the collar. Dominic walked to his desk and pressed a button on the intercom. "Marco, bring a plate from the kitchen. Hot food, soup, bread, meat, and bring a bottle of water." "No, 2 bottles." "Yes, boss." The voice crackled back. Dominic leaned against the edge of his massive oak desk, crossing his arms over his chest. He was in his suit vest and dress shirt now, the white fabric straining against the muscles of his arms. He watched her. She was thawing out, her cheeks turning a patchy red. She looked around the room with wide, fearful eyes, expecting him to demand something in return. "What is your name?" he asked. "Valentina," she whispered. "Valentina." He tested the name. It rolled off his tongue like fine wine. "I am Dominic." "I know," she said softly. Everyone knew Dominic Vescari. A knock at the door interrupted them. Marco entered with a tray. He set it down on the low table in front of Valentina with a clatter, shooting her a look of disdain. Dominic dismissed him with a wave of his hand. Valentina stared at the food, a bowl of steaming minestrone, a thick steak sandwich, and warm bread rolls. Her stomach gave a violent growl that echoed in the quiet room. Shame flooded her face. "Eat," Dominic said. He walked over to the window, turning his back to her to give her privacy. "I'm not going to take it away." He watched her reflection in the glass. She ate with a frantic, desperate hunger, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold the spoon. She tore into the bread. It was the most honest thing he had seen in years. When she slowed down, pushing the empty bowl away, Dominic turned back. She looked sleepy now, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind exhaustion. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger. "I can go now. I feel better." Dominic looked at her bare feet, which were still red and swollen. "You have no shoes. Valentina, you have no coat. It is 2:00 in the morning. Where exactly will you go?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. "I'll figure it out." "No," Dominic said. The finality in his tone brooked no argument. "You will not." He walked over to his desk and picked up a key card. "I have a penthouse on the top floor. There is a guest room. You will sleep there tonight." Valentina shrank back into the chair. I can't do that. I'm not that kind of girl." Dominic paused, his eyes flashing. "Do not insult me. I am offering you a bed, not a proposition. You sleep, you eat. In the morning, we figure out what to do with you." He leaned in closer, his hands resting on the arms of her chair, trapping her. "But listen to me carefully. Valentina, do not steal from me. Do not try to run. The elevator requires a code, and my men are everywhere. You are safe, but only if you stay where I put you." She looked into his dark eyes and saw the truth there. He was dangerous. Yes, but he was offering sanctuary. "Okay," she whispered. The penthouse was larger than the entire foster home she had grown up in. The floors were marble, the walls glass, revealing the glittering skyline of Chicago. It was silent. High above the chaos of the streets, Dominic led her down a hallway and opened a door. There is a bathroom attached. There are towels, soap, sleep. He didn't wait for a thank you. He turned and walked away, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. Valentina stood in the center of the room. The bed was massive, covered in a duvet that looked like a cloud. She touched it tentatively, afraid she might dirty it. She went into the bathroom. It was all white stone and gold fixtures. She turned on the shower, and steam instantly filled the room. Peeling off her filthy, damp clothes, she caught sight of herself in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. She looked broken. Bruises bloomed across her ribs, a parting gift from the ex-boyfriend she had fled 3 weeks ago. Her hip bones protruded sharply against her pale skin. Her ribs were visible with every breath. She looked like a bird that had flown into a window. She stepped into the water. It was hot, scaldingly hot. She let it run over her head, washing away the grime of the alley, the slush of the street, the feeling of hands grabbing at her. She scrubbed her skin until it was pink and raw. This is temporary, she told herself, leaning her forehead against the cool tile of the shower wall. Just for tonight. Tomorrow. I have to run again, but for the first time in weeks. She wasn't cold. Out in the living area, Dominic sat on his leather sofa, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand. The liquid was amber and smooth. He stared at the closed door of the guest room. Oh, he should not have brought her up here. It was a security risk. It was irrational. Marco was right. She was a stray. But he couldn't get the image of her freezing to death out of his head. He took a sip of whiskey. He wondered who had put the fear in her eyes. He had seen the way she flinched when he moved his hand too fast. He had seen the way she scanned the room for exits. Someone had hurt her, badly. A dark, possessive anger coiled in his gut. He tamped it down. She was a stranger. She was nothing to him. He stayed awake, listening. The silence of the apartment was usually his solace, but tonight it felt charged. 3 hours later, the silence broke. It started as a whimper, then escalated to a sob. Dominic was on his feet before his conscious mind registered the sound. He crossed the hallway in 3 long strides and pushed open the guest room door. Valentina was thrashing in the bed, tangled in the high thread count sheets. She was crying out, words that made no sense. Pleas for someone to stop. "No, please, no," she moaned, her head tossing from side to side. Dominic approached the bed. He knew better than to grab someone in the throes of a night terror. He sat on the edge of the mattress, the bed dipping under his weight. "Valentina," he said, his voice low and steady, a commanding rumble. She gasped, her eyes flying open, but she wasn't seeing him. She was seeing a ghost from her past. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the headboard, her knees drawn to her chest. "Shh," Dominic whispered. He held his hands up, palms open, showing he held no weapon. "You are safe. You are in Chicago. You are in my home. No one is here but me." She stared at him, her chest heaving. The terror began to recede, replaced by the crushing weight of reality. She looked around the dark room, then at the man sitting at the foot of the bed. The monster everyone feared was sitting there in his dress shirt, his tie undone, looking at her with an expression that was almost gentle. "I'm sorry," she choked out, wiping her face. "I had a nightmare. I'm sorry I woke you." "Don't apologize for your dreams," Dominic said. "They cannot hurt you here." He stayed there. He did not reach for her. He did not try to hush her with physical contact. He just sat there, a solid, immovable anchor in the storm of her panic. He began to talk, his voice a low drone in the darkness. He talked about the snow outside. He talked about the heating system in the building, mundane things, grounding things, slowly. The tension left her shoulders. Her breathing slowed to a rhythmic match of his own. "Go back to sleep," he murmured. "I will sit here until you do." "You don't have to," she whispered, her eyelids heavy. "I know." She fell asleep 10 minutes later. Dominic waited another 20 minutes to be sure. Then he stood, silent as a shadow, and left the room, leaving the door cracked open just an inch. Morning sunlight hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, bathing the space in a blinding white light. Dominic was already dressed, nursing his third espresso of the morning. When Valentina emerged from the hallway, she was wearing one of his T-shirts she must have found in the closet. It hung to her knees, swallowing her whole. She looked cleaner, softer but still wary. "Good morning," Dominic said, not looking up from the tablet where he was reading the overnight reports. "Good morning," she replied, standing awkwardly by the kitchen island. I should go. Thank you for everything, truly." Dominic set the tablet down. He looked at her. He saw the bruises more clearly in the daylight. He saw the way her hands trembled slightly on the marble countertop. "Marco has laid out breakfast," Dominic said, gesturing to the spread of fruit, pastries, and eggs. "Eat. I really need to leave," Valentina insisted, though her eyes lingered on the food. "I can't impose anymore." Dominic stood up. He walked around the island until he was standing in front of her. He was a giant compared to her. "You have no money," he listed, ticking the points off on his fingers. "You have no coat. You have no shoes. You have no home." "I'll manage," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. Dominic felt a flicker of admiration. She had spirit. "I spoke to my staff," Dominic said, ignoring her protest. "You can work in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, washing dishes. It is not glamorous, but it pays. And it comes with a room." Valentina stared at him. "Why?" "Why what? Why would you do that? You don't know me." Dominic looked at her, really looked at her. He thought about the feeling in his chest when he saw her shivering in the alley. He thought about the fierce protectiveness that had surged when she cried in her sleep. "I need a dishwasher." He lied smoothly. "And I don't like wasting potential." "I'll only stay a few days," she said, trying to set boundaries with a man who owned the city. "Just until I get on my feet." Dominic picked up his coffee cup, bringing it to his lips to hide the slight curve of a smile. He turned back to the window, looking out at the frozen city below. "We'll see," he said. The kitchen of Club Umbra operated with the frenetic energy of a war room. It was a symphony of clattering pans, hissing steam, and the sharp, rhythmic thud of knives against cutting boards. The air was thick with the scent of garlic. roasting meats and reduced balsamic vinegar. In the center of this chaos, Valentina Ruiz made herself as small as possible. She stood at a stainless steel prep station in the far corner, peeling potatoes with a meticulous, quiet focus. She wore a white apron that was 2 sizes too big, wrapped twice around her waist. Her hands, now scrubbed clean of the alley's grime, worked steadily. She kept her head down. She spoke only when spoken to, usually just a nod or a soft yes. Sir, to the head chef, a boisterous man named Luca who seemed baffled by her presence but terrified to question it. Dominic Viscari had given the order, and in this building, Dominic's word was not just law, it was scripture. For 3 days, Valentina had worked until her back ached and her fingers pruned from the water, trying to earn the food she ate and the soft bed she slept in upstairs. She wanted to be useful. If she was useful, maybe she wouldn't be discarded. But she was never truly alone. She would feel the change in the room's atmosphere before she saw him. The chatter among the line cooks would die down. The dishwasher would stop humming his tune, the air would grow heavier, charged with static. Dominic would appear in the doorway. He never came fully into the kitchen. He simply leaned against the frame, his arms crossed over his chest, his Italian suit immaculate against the industrial grime of the workspace. He did not speak to the staff. He watched her. His gaze was physical. Valentina could feel it tracking the movement of her hands, the curve of her neck as she bent over the sink, the way she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. It was intense, unreadable, and relentless. When she would finally work up the courage to glance at him, his expression remained impassive, dark eyes burning with a quiet calculation that made her heart hammer against her ribs. He was dissecting her, layer by layer, searching for something she was sure she did not have. Late on the 4th night, after the club had closed and the kitchen was silent, Valentina retreated to the penthouse. The elevator ride was always a source of anxiety, the smooth ascent feeling like she was rising too high above the world she belonged in. She entered the guest room, her sanctuary. It was silent and cool. She changed into the oversized t-shirt she had been washing in the sink every night, then crawled into the massive bed. She did not lock the door. It was an hour later when the handle turned. Valentina was awake instantly, her body tense, but she did not scream. She lay perfectly still, feigning sleep, her breathing shallow. Dominic stepped into the room. He moved with the silent grace of a predator, his footsteps absorbed by the thick carpet. He did not approach the bed. He stopped just inside the threshold. "You left it unlocked," he said into the darkness. His voice was low, a rumble of rough velvet. Valentina sat up slowly, pulling the duvet up to her chin. The city lights from the window cast long, fractured shadows across the room. Dominic stood in the gloom, a silhouette of broad shoulders and stillness. "I know," she whispered. "Why?" Dominic asked. He took a step closer. "You are a woman running from something, a woman who flinches when a hand is raised too quickly. Yet you sleep in the home of a crime boss with your door unlocked. Is it stupidity, Valentina, or is it trust?" Valentina looked at him. The fear was there. Certainly, he was a man who commanded violence like a conductor commanded an orchestra. But beneath the fear, there was a strange, illogical sense of safety she had not felt in years. "The lock is on the inside," she said softly. "If I lock it, you can't get in. But if I lock it, I'm trapping myself inside, too. I don't like being trapped." Dominic processed this. He walked to the chair in the corner and sat down, the leather creaking under his weight. "Who trapped you before?" She stiffened. "No one." "Liar," he said, without heat. "You have bruises on your ribs that are turning yellow. You have a scar on your collarbone. You look over your shoulder every time a door opens. Tell me his name." "It doesn't matter," Valentina deflected, picking at a loose thread on the duvet. "He's in the past. I left." "You ran," Dominic corrected. "There is a difference. Leaving is a choice. Running is a necessity." "I am working," she said, changing the subject desperately. "Luca said I am getting faster at the prep work. I am earning my keep." Dominic sighed, a sound of frustration. I do not need you to peel potatoes. Valentina, I have machines that peel potatoes. Then what do you need? He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes catching a glint of light from the window. I'm still figuring that out. He stood up abruptly. Sleep, and locked the door. I have men in this building who are not as disciplined as I am. He left before she could answer, the door clicking shut, but not locking behind him. The following afternoon, the tension in the penthouse was palpable. Dominic stood in his private study, looking out at the gray Chicago skyline. Behind him, Marco and 2 other lieutenants, heavy men with suspicious eyes, were pacing. It doesn't sit right. Dom, Marco said, his voice rough. She shows up out of nowhere? Right after the meeting with the Greeks? No ID, no phone, no credit history. She's a ghost. Ghosts don't just appear unless someone sends them. She was freezing to death, Dominic said, his back still turned. Or she was planted there. The second man, Enzo, argued. A pretty girl. Sad eyes, broken bird routine. It's the oldest trick in the book. She gets in. She gets close. She finds the safe. Or she plants a bug. You're letting her wander the kitchen, the penthouse. She hears things. Dominic turned slowly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He looked at Enzo, then at Marco. His expression was terrifyingly calm. You think I'm compromised? Dominic asked softly. We think you're distracted, Marco said, bold but stepping back slightly. We should question her properly. Find out who she really is. Touch her, Dominic said, his voice barely above a whisper, and I will remove your hands. The silence that followed was absolute. The men stared at him, shock registering on their hardened faces. Dominic Vascari did not make threats regarding women. He viewed them as collateral or distractions. He certainly never threatened his top lieutenants over a stray. Dominic walked over to his desk and placed his hands flat on the mahogany surface. He leaned forward, his eyes dark and dangerous. She is not a spy, he stated, with the conviction of a man who trusted his instincts more than any dossier. She's not a threat. Dom, Marco started. She is mine. Dominic cut him off. The words hung in the air, heavy and possessive. It was a claim of ownership, a declaration of territory. She belongs to this house now. Any man who looks at her with suspicion is questioning my judgment. Do we have a problem? No, boss, Marco muttered, looking at the floor. No problem. Good. Get out. That night, the club was closed for a private event, but the penthouse remained quiet. Dominic found Valentina in the kitchen, scrubbing a pot that was already clean. He took the sponge from her hand and set it down. Come with me, he said. She dried her hands on her apron, looking up at him nervously. Did I do something wrong? Marco looked at me today like he wanted to kill me. Marco is an idiot, Dominic grunted. Come. He led her not to the guest room, but to the private elevator. He pressed a code into the keypad, and they ascended to the very top of the building. Higher than the penthouse, the doors opened to a rush of cold air, but it was bearable. They stepped out into a rooftop garden enclosed in high walls of glass. It was a sanctuary of greenery in the middle of the concrete jungle. Heat lamps cast a warm, orange glow over slate pathways and manicured hedges. Above them, the city lights were drowned out by the surprising clarity of the winter stars. Valentina gasped softly. It's beautiful. It is the only place in the city where I can hear myself think, Dominic said. He walked to the edge of the glass wall, looking down at the tiny cars moving like blood cells through the arteries of the street below. Valentina joined him, keeping a respectful distance. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She pushed it back, shivering slightly, though she was wearing a thick sweater he had provided. Why did you bring me here? She asked. Because you are terrified down there, he said, not looking at her. You walk around like you are waiting for the floor to open up. I wanted you to see that there is solid ground beneath your feet. He turned to face her, leaning his hip against the glass railing. Talk to me. Valentina, no deflections, no lies. Who made you feel like you had to run? Maybe it was the height, or the stars, or the way he had defended her against his own men. Even if she hadn't heard it, She felt the walls she had built around her heart begin to crack. "I was in the system," she began, her voice trembling. "Foster care. Since I was 4. I never stayed in one house for more than 6 months. I was difficult. They said too quiet, or too loud, or I ate too much. It was always something." Dominic watched her, his face softening. "When I aged out," she continued, looking at her hands, "I met a man. He was charming. He made me feel like I finally had a home. But then the charm wore off. He liked to drink. He liked to hit things when he was angry. Walls, dishes." She paused, swallowing hard. "Me." Dominic's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. "I tried to leave 3 times, she whispered. "He always found me. He said I was nothing without him. He said no one else would ever want a broken thing like me, that I was unlovable. Unwanted." She looked up at Dominic, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. And he was right. I was never wanted. Not by my parents, not by the foster families. I'm just excess. Dominic moved then. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides. He reached out, his hand large and warm, and cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped, then tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. His touch was reverent, gentle in a way that contradicted everything she knew about him. "That is not true anymore," he said roughly. Valentina's breath hitched. She looked at his mouth, then his eyes. The intensity there burned her. "Dominic," she breathed. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, when she tilted her chin up toward him, he closed the gap. The kiss was not devouring. It was a question. It was slow, searching, and hesitant. His lips were firm but incredibly soft against hers. He tasted scotch and mint. Valentina stood frozen for a heartbeat, her hands hovering at her sides, before instinct took over. She reached up, her fingers gripping the lapels of his coat, anchoring herself to him. He groaned low in his throat, his arms sliding around her waist to pull her flush against his hard body. He kissed her like she was something precious, something fragile that he was terrified of breaking. It was a kiss that promised violence to the rest of the world and peace to her. When he pulled back, they were both breathless. His forehead rested against hers, their breath mingling in the cold air. "You don't have to be scared when you're with me," he whispered, his voice gritty with emotion. "Do you understand? I will burn this city to ash before I let anyone touch you again." Valentina nodded, unable to speak. She felt safe. For the first time in her life, safety wasn't an illusion. It was a fortress. The next morning, Valentina woke with the memory of the kiss burning on her lips. She sat up, expecting the cold reality of her situation to crash down on her. But instead, she saw a large, flat box sitting on the foot of the bed. She crawled toward it and lifted the lid. Inside were clothes. Not the oversized t-shirts or the practical uniform of the kitchen. These were soft things. Cashmere sweaters in cream and soft gray. Jeans that looked like they would actually fit her. A heavy winter coat lined with fleece. A pair of sturdy leather boots. There was no note. There didn't need to be. Valentina ran her hand over the cashmere. It was softer than anything she had ever touched. Tears pricked her eyes again. But this time it wasn't from sadness. It was overwhelming. She dressed slowly. The jeans fit perfectly. He must have estimated her size just by looking at her. The sweater was warm and comforting. She looked in the mirror. She didn't look like the beggar from the alley anymore. She looked like a woman who belonged in a penthouse. But panic flared in her chest. This kindness. It was a trap of a different kind. If she got used to this, to the warmth, to him, how would she ever survive when it ended? And it had to end. Men like Dominic Viscari didn't keep women like her forever. She found him in the library, reading a newspaper. He looked up as she entered, his eyes sweeping over her new attire with satisfaction. "It fits," he observed. "It's too much," she said, her voice shaking. "I can't accept this. I can't pay you back for this." "I did not ask for payment," Dominic said, folding the paper. "I asked you to stop looking like a ghost." He stood up and walked over to her. He reached out and adjusted the collar of her new coat. "I have to go to the warehouse district today. You will stay here. I can go for a walk," she suggested. "Now that I have a coat," Dominic's face hardened instantly. "No, you will not go outside." "Why?" she asked, the earlier warmth fading into confusion. "Am I a prisoner?" "You are a target," he said bluntly. "My enemies have eyes everywhere. They saw me bring you in. They saw the way I looked at you at the window. If you walk out that door alone, they will take you. Not to hurt you, but to hurt me." Valentina stepped back, the reality of his world crashing into the romance of the previous night. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice rising. "Why help me? Why buy me clothes? Why kiss me? I'm nobody. You're the king of Chicago. Why me?" Dominic looked at her, his expression filled with a complex, tortured darkness. He looked like a man carrying the weight of 1,000 sins. "Because I have hurt people my whole life," he said quietly. "I have destroyed businesses. I have broken families. I have ended my life. My hands are stained with things that will never wash off." He took a step closer, towering over her, his presence encompassing her entire world. "And maybe," he whispered, reaching out to touch her cheek again, "maybe I don't want to hurt you. Maybe saving you is the only way I can save whatever is left of my soul." Valentina looked at him. Seeing the man beneath the monster, she saw the desperation in him, the need for redemption that mirrored her own need for safety. "Okay," she whispered, "I'll stay." "Good," Dominic said. He kissed her forehead, a chaste, possessive seal. "I will be back." He turned and walked out the door, leaving her standing in the quiet luxury of his home, wrapped in his clothes, protected by his name, and utterly terrified of the love that was beginning to take root in the dangerous soil of their lives. The dress was midnight blue silk, fluid and heavy, sliding over Valentina's skin like cool water. It had been delivered an hour ago by a team of stylists who worked with the efficiency of a pit crew, transforming the girl from the alley into a weapon of elegance. Standing before the full-length mirror in the guest suite, Valentina hardly recognized herself. The bruises on her ribs were hidden beneath the fabric, and makeup had concealed the shadows under her eyes. Her dark hair fell in soft, deliberate waves down her back. She looked expensive. She looked like she belonged in a world of gold and blood, but inside, she was shaking. A knock came at the door. Dominic entered. He paused in the doorway, his hand still on the brass handle. He was dressed in a black tuxedo, tailored to perfection, emphasizing the width of his shoulders and the dangerous stillness that always surrounded him. His eyes swept over her, starting at her heels and moving slowly up to her eyes. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with a sudden, electric tension. He did not smile. Dominic Viscari rarely smiled. Instead, his expression was one of dark, possessive satisfaction. "You look breathtaking," he said, his voice low and rough. Valentina smoothed the silk over her hips nervously. "I feel like I'm wearing a costume, like a child playing dress-up." Dominic closed the door and walked toward her. "You are not a child, Valentina, and tonight you are not playing. Tonight you are by my side. You are the queen of the board." "I don't know how to be a queen," she whispered, looking down. He reached out, hooking a finger under her chin and tilting her face up until she was forced to meet his gaze. "You just sit there. You look beautiful. And you let me worry about the rest." The descent into Club Umbra was different this time. She did not sneak in through the back. She walked through the main floor, Dominic's hand firmly placed on the small of her back, a branding iron of heat through the silk. The music was a pounding rhythm that vibrated in her chest. The air smelled of expensive perfume, sweat, and ambition. As they moved through the crowd, the sea of bodies parted. Men in suits nodded respectfully. Women stared with envy and curiosity. Valentina kept her head high, drawing strength from the solid presence beside her. They reached the VIP booth, a semicircular enclosure of black velvet raised above the dance floor. It was the throne room of the club. Several men were already seated there, Captains, associates, business partners. Their conversation died instantly as Dominic entered. Dominic sat, pulling Valentina down beside him. He did not introduce her. He simply poured a glass of champagne and placed it in her hand. Viscari. A man across the table nodded. He was older, with a face like tanned leather and eyes that missed nothing. This was Salvatore Rossi, a high-ranking associate from the East Coast families. "We did not know you were bringing a guest." Salvatore's gaze lingered on Valentina. Heavy and assessing, it was the look of a man estimating the value of a racehorse. "And who might this be? I haven't seen her on the circuit." Valentina froze, her grip on the champagne flute tightening. She waited for Dominic to dismiss her, to call her an employee, a charity case. Dominic leaned back, draping his arm along the back of the booth behind Valentina's shoulders. The movement was casual, but the message was clear. He stared at Salvatore with a cold, unblinking intensity. "This is Valentina," Dominic said. "Valentina," Salvatore repeated, testing the name. "A lovely name. Does she have a last name? A family?" "She is with me," Dominic said. His voice did not rise, but the temperature at the table dropped. "Of course. Dom, she's with you tonight." Salvatore smiled, an oily expression. "But where did you find her? She looks fresh." Dominic set his glass down. The sound of crystal hitting the table was sharp. He leaned forward, invading Salvatore's space without moving from his seat. "You're asking too many questions. Sal, just curious," Salvatore said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Usually, your women are strictly business. This one seems different." "She is," Dominic said. He turned his head slightly, looking at Valentina, then back to the room. "She is someone who belongs to me." The words rippled through the booth. The other men shifted uncomfortably. To claim a woman so publicly, to use those specific words, was a declaration. In their world, it meant she was under his protection. It meant touching her was an act of war. Salvatore's smile faltered. He looked at Valentina with a new expression. Calculation. He saw a weakness, a vulnerability in the armor of the Iron King. "I see," Salvatore murmured. "My apologies. She is exquisite." The rest of the night passed in a blur of tension. Valentina sat rigid, feeling the eyes of the room on her. She felt like a target painted in neon. Dominic kept his arm around her, his thumb tracing slow, soothing circles on her shoulder, but she could feel the coiled aggression in his body. He was waiting for a reason to strike. When the party ended and they returned to the silence of the penthouse, Valentina pulled away from him as soon as the elevator doors closed. She walked quickly down the hallway, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She needed to get out of the dress. She needed to get out of this life before it swallowed her whole. "Valentina," Dominic called after her. "Don't," she said, spinning around to face him. "Don't look at me like that." Dominic stopped, his expression confused. "Like what?" "Like I am something precious," she cried out, tears stinging her eyes. "I saw how they looked at me. Dominic, I saw how that man looked at you. I'm not a queen. I'm a liability. I'm a weakness." "You are not a weakness," Dominic growled, stepping closer. "I am," she insisted, backing away until her shoulders hit the wall. "I don't belong here. I don't know the rules. I can't protect myself, let alone you. You should have left me in the alley. You're going to get hurt because of me." Dominic moved faster than she thought possible. He was in front of her, boxing her in. His hands planted on the wall on either side of her head. He didn't touch her, but he consumed her field of vision. His eyes were wild, stripping away the cool facade of the mafia boss to reveal the desperate man beneath. "Stop talking," he commanded. "You think I care about their rules? You think I care what they think?" "You should," she whispered, trembling. "You have an empire to run. I'm just the girl you pitied." "Is that what you think this is?" Dominic asked, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Pity?" He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. She could feel the heat radiating off him. "I have not wanted anyone in years." "Valentina," he confessed, the words torn from his throat. I have been dead inside for a decade, cold, empty, just a machine that makes money and spills blood, until I saw you." Valentina's breath hitched. She looked into his eyes and saw the raw honesty there. "You woke me up," he murmured. "Do not tell me I don't want you. It is the only thing I am sure of." Valentina let out a shaky breath. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a surging tide of longing. She reached up, her hands trembling as they touched the lapels of his tuxedo. "Dominic," she breathed. He didn't wait. He captured her mouth in a kiss that was vastly different from the one on the rooftop. That had been a question. This was an answer. It was deep, consuming, and desperate. He kissed her like he was starving, and she was the only sustenance in the world. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her bridal style into his bedroom. The room was dark, lit only by the city glow from the windows. He set her down on the edge of the massive bed, treating her as if she were made of spun glass. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The air crackled with vulnerability. This was the precipice. Valentina reached out, her fingers shaking as she began to undo the buttons of his shirt, one by one. She revealed the hard planes of his chest, the scars that mapped his violent history. She traced a jagged line over his heart with her fingertips. Dominic shuddered at her touch. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I am not a good man, Valentina." "I know," she whispered. "Be good to me." "I will," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear it. I will never hurt you." He undressed her slowly, reverently. When the silk dress fell away, she instinctively tried to cover herself, ashamed of her bruises, her thinness. Dominic gently pulled her hands away. He looked at her body not with lust, but with worship. He kissed the fading bruise on her hip. He kissed the scar on her shoulder. He reclaimed every inch of her skin that had known pain, replacing the memory of violence with the warmth of his adoration. When he finally lowered her onto the sheets, covering her body with his, the weight of him was grounding. He moved with agonizing slowness, checking her eyes every second, waiting for a sign of fear, but there was no fear. There was only the overwhelming realization that she was safe. Their union was not a frantic clash of bodies, but a slow, rhythmic melding of souls. It was intimate and emotionally raw. Tears slipped from Valentina's eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer intensity of being held by a man who looked at her as if she were the sun. Dominic kissed the tears away, murmuring praise and reassurances against her skin. In the darkness of the room, the mafia boss and the runaway girl ceased to exist. There was only the man and the woman, finding salvation in each other's arms. The morning light brought a harsh return to reality. Valentina woke up wrapped in Dominic's arms, her head resting on his chest. For a few minutes, the world was perfect. Then, a sharp knock on the bedroom door shattered the peace. Dominic tensed instantly. He carefully extricated himself from Valentina, pulling on a robe. He opened the door a crack. Marco stood there, his face pale and grave. "Boss, we have a problem." Dominic stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. "What is it?" "The Greeks," Marco said quietly, "and the Russo family. They were talking after the party last night. Word is out. They saw you with the girl. They saw the way you looked at her." "So?" Dominic demanded. "So, they are calling her your Achilles heel," Marco said. "We intercepted a call an hour ago. Russo is planning to snatch her. They think if they have her, they can force you to concede the South Side territories." Dominic felt the blood drain from his face. The nightmare scenario. He had painted a target on her back just by loving her. He walked back into the bedroom. Valentina was sitting up, the sheet pulled around her, looking at him with sleepy, confused eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked. Sensing the shift in his energy, Dominic sat on the edge of the bed. He took her hands in his. His grip was tight, almost painful. "Valentina, you need to listen to me." She nodded, fear spiking in her chest. "People saw us last night. Dangerous people. They know you are important to me." He paused, his jaw working. "They plan to take you," Valentina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I told you. I told you I was a liability. I have to leave. If I leave, you're safe. No! Dominic's voice cracked like a whip. If you leave, you are dead. They will find you. They will use you to get to me. And when they are done... He couldn't finish the sentence. The thought made bile rise in his throat. Then what do we do? She cried. Dominic looked at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, and it mirrored his own. He had to lock this down. He had to make her untouchable. Marry me, he said. The room went silent. Valentina stared at him, her mouth slightly open. What? Marry me, Dominic repeated, his voice gaining strength. Today. Now. Dominic, you're panicking, she said, shaking her head. You don't want to marry me. We've known each other for a week. This is crazy. It is necessary, he argued, his business mind taking over the panic. If you are my wife, you have full legal immunity. You are next of kin. You have access to every account, every safe house. But more importantly, in our world, a wife is different from a girlfriend. To touch a boss's wife is a death sentence that brings down the wrath of the entire commission. Even Russo wouldn't dare cross that line without facing war from every family in the city. So it's a strategy, Valentina said, her voice small. A business deal. Dominic looked at her, and the mask slipped. No, it is the only way I can breathe. If I lose you, Valentina, I will not survive it. He wasn't talking about his business. He was talking about his life. Valentina saw the raw, naked fear in his eyes. The king of Chicago was begging her to let him save her, because saving her meant saving himself. She looked at his hand holding hers. She thought about the cold alley. She thought about the way he had washed her scars with kisses the night before. Okay, she whispered. Yes. An hour later, they stood in the private chapel located on the grounds of Dominic's estate. It was a small, stone building, cold and smelling of old incense. A terrified priest, roused from his bed, stood at the altar. Marco and Enzo stood by the doors, hands on their weapons, acting as witnesses. There was no white dress. Valentina wore a simple cream dress she had found in the closet. Dominic wore a black suit. The ceremony was short. There were no flowery vows, no music. Just the quiet, hurried murmuring of Latin prayers and the heavy weight of impending danger. Do you... Dominic, take Valentina. I do, Dominic said, his voice resonating off the stone walls. Do you? Valentina. She looked up at him. His face was severe, his eyes dark and stormy, but his hand, holding hers, was trembling slightly. I do, she said softly. I now pronounce you man and wife. Dominic turned to her. He didn't smile. He reached out, cupping her face with both hands. He kissed her with a trembling urgency, a seal on a pact that was written in blood and desperation. You are Mrs. Vascari now, he whispered against her lips, his forehead resting against hers. Let them come. I will kill them all. Valentina clung to him, the gold band on her finger feeling heavy and cold. Everything had changed. She was no longer the invisible girl. She was the queen of a kingdom at war, and she was terrified. The Vascari estate was not a home. It was a fortress disguised as a palace, located an hour outside of Chicago, hidden behind 12-foot stone walls and a perimeter of iron heavy enough to stop a truck. The mansion stood in the center of 50 acres of snow-covered woodland. It was a place of breathtaking, terrified silence. Valentina watched the iron gates close behind the armored SUV with a heavy thud that reverberated in her chest. She twisted the gold band on her finger, the metal still feeling foreign and heavy. She was Mrs. Vascari now, a wife, a target, a queen in a castle she had never asked for. Dominic sat beside her, his hand resting possessively on her knee. He had been silent during the drive, his eyes scanning the tree line with the habitual paranoia of a man who knew exactly how many people wanted him dead. This is where we live now, Dominic said as the car pulled up to the massive oak front doors. The city is too open, too many windows. Here, I control everything. He led her inside. The foyer was cavernous, with marble floors that echoed under their feet and a crystal chandelier that looked like frozen tears suspended in the air. It was beautiful, but cold. Dominic stopped in the center of the hall. He turned to her, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a heavy ring of keys and a black key card. He pressed them into her palm, closing her fingers over them. "This grants you access to everything," he said, his voice solemn. "The accounts, the safe rooms, the gates. You are my wife. There are no locked doors for you here. Valentina." She looked at the keys, feeling the weight of the trust he was placing in her. "But listen to me," he continued, his gaze hardening, staring deep into her eyes. "I give you my world. I give you my name. But the one thing I cannot survive is betrayal. Do not lie to me. Do not hide things from me. We are one entity now. If you break, I break." "I won't," she whispered, terrified by the intensity of his vow. "I promise." For the first few weeks, the fear of the outside world was eclipsed by the intensity of their private one. They existed in a bubble of newfound intimacy. Dominic, usually a creature of darkness and violence, unraveled in the safety of the mansion. Mornings became a ritual of slow, languid awakening. Valentina would wake to find the sun filtering through the heavy velvet drapes, casting long beams across the silk sheets. Dominic would already be awake, watching her, his dark hair mussed, the hard lines of his face softened by sleep. He would pull her close, his skin warm against hers, murmuring things in Italian that she didn't understand but felt in her marrow. They spent their evenings in the grand dining room, eating meals prepared by a private chef, but often ignoring the food to talk. Dominic was hungry for her history, for the small details of her life that she had deemed insignificant. He wanted to know her favorite color, the books she read, the dreams she had buried. One evening, as a storm rattled the window panes, Dominic stood up from the table and extended his hand. Without a word, he pulled her into a slow dance. There was no music, only the sound of the wind and the crackling of the fire in the hearth. He held her firmly, his hand splayed across her lower back, guiding her through the steps. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady, powerful thrum of his heart. "You're happy?" he asked, his chin resting on the top of her head. "I am safe," she answered, "and I am with you." "That is not the same thing as being happy," he murmured, tightening his hold. "It is enough for me," she said, and she meant it. But the bubble was fragile. It started with a phone. Dominic had given her a new, encrypted device, claiming it was for her safety. She was scrolling through a news feed one afternoon in the sunroom when a message popped up. It was from an unknown number. "He is not who you think he is. Ask him about the docks in 2015. Ask him about my brother. He butchered him like an animal. Leave before it is too late. You are sleeping with the devil." Valentina dropped the phone as if it had burned her. She stared at the screen, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He butchered him. She knew Dominic was a criminal. She knew he was dangerous. But knowing it in the abstract was different from reading the accusation of a grieving sibling. That evening, the doubts began to take root. She watched him differently. When he took a business call in the hallway, she didn't see the husband who brushed her hair. She saw the dawn. His voice dropped an octave, becoming a jagged thing of ice and steel. "Burn it down," she heard him say, his face devoid of emotion. "I do not care who is inside. If they do not pay, they do not operate. Burn it." He hung up and turned around, his face instantly shifting back to a mask of calm when he saw her, but the transition terrified her. It was too smooth, too practiced. "Is everything all right?" he asked, reaching out to touch her arm. Valentina flinched. It was a microscopic movement, but Dominic saw it. His hand froze in midair, then slowly dropped to his side. "What is it?" he asked, his voice cooling. "Nothing," she lied, her heart racing. "Just a chill." Dominic stared at her for a long moment, his eyes searching for the truth, before nodding once and walking away. The next day, Valentina found Marco in the garage, polishing one of the armored sedans. Marco had always treated her with a mix of suspicion and begrudging respect, but he was the only one who knew Dominic as well as she was beginning to. "Marco," she started, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. Has he ever been in love before? Marco stopped polishing. He stood up slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. His expression shut down completely. Mrs. Viscari, he said, his tone formal and warning. Dom is a private man. I know, she pressed. But there are rumors. People say things. Was there someone else? Someone he lost? Marco walked over to her, invading her personal space just enough to be intimidating. Listen to me. Dominic has given you the world. He burned bridges to marry you. Do not go digging in the graveyard of his past. There are ghosts there that you do not want to wake up. What happened to her? Valentina whispered. She died, Marco said bluntly, because she was in the game. You are not in the game. Stay out of it. He turned his back on her, ending the conversation. But the seed was planted, and it was growing fast. Valentina couldn't stop thinking about it. She died. Was that why Dominic was so protective? Was she just a replacement for a dead woman, a second chance to get it right? 2 days later, Dominic was in the city for a meeting with the commission. The house was quiet. Valentina found herself in his private study, a room she rarely entered alone. It smelled of leather, tobacco, and him. She sat at his desk, tracing the grain of the wood. She shouldn't be here. She had promised not to hide things, and here she was, snooping like the spy his men accused her of being. Her hand brushed against the center drawer. It was locked. She remembered the key ring he had given her. There are no locked doors for you here. Her hands trembling. She pulled the heavy keys from her pocket. She found the small brass key that looked like it fit a desk. She hesitated. If she opened this, she was breaching his trust, but the message on her phone, the coldness in his voice. She needed to know who she was married to. She inserted the key. The lock clicked. She pulled the drawer open. It was mostly empty, save for a few legal documents in a black velvet box. She opened the box. Inside lay a silver locket and a photograph. The photograph was old, perhaps 10 years. It showed a younger Dominic, his face unscarred, his smile wider and more carefree than she had ever seen. His arm was around a woman. She was beautiful, with dark, cascading hair and eyes that looked hauntingly like Valentina's. They looked happy. They looked in love. Valentina opened the silver locket. Inside was a tiny inscription. Elena. My heart. The air left Valentina's lungs. She felt like she had been punched. It wasn't just that he had loved someone else. That was expected. It was the resemblance, the dark hair, the pale skin, the fragility. I'm a ghost, she whispered to the empty room. I'm just a stand-in for a ghost. What are you doing? The voice was low, dangerous, and came from the doorway. Valentina jumped, dropping the photo. It fluttered to the desk, landing face up. Dominic stood in the entrance of the study. He had returned early. He was still in his coat, wet from the snow. His eyes were fixed on the open drawer, then moved to her face. The betrayal in his expression was absolute. I gave you everything, he said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. I gave you the keys. I gave you my trust, and I come home to find you digging through my private grief. Who is she? Valentina demanded, her own fear turning into defensive anger. She held up the locket. Who is Elena? Dominic flinched as if she had struck him. He walked into the room, tearing off his coat and throwing it onto a chair. She is none of your concern. She looks like me, Valentina cried, tears spilling over. Marco said she died. Did you kill her or did you just fail her? Stop it, Dominic warned, his voice dropping to a growl. Am I just a replacement? She screamed, the insecurity pouring out of her. Did you pick me up off the street because I reminded you of her? Is that why you want to save me? To make up for letting her die? I said stop. Tell me, Valentina pushed, slamming her hand on the desk. Tell me I'm not just a consolation prize for a dead woman, Dominic roared. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated pain. He swept his arm across the desk, sending books and papers flying. She died in my arms, he yelled, his chest heaving. They shot her because I was too slow, because I was arrogant. I watched the light leave her eyes. The silence that followed was deafening. Dominic stood there, breathing hard, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He looked broken. She wasn't you. he said, his voice breaking, dropping to a hoarse whisper. She was sweet. She was innocent, but she wasn't you. He looked up at Valentina, his eyes red-rimmed and terrified. You think I picked you because you look like her? You think I want to relive that pain? He crossed the distance between them, not with anger, but with a desperate need to be understood. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip bruising. I am not angry because you found the photo, he confessed, his voice trembling. I am terrified. I'm terrified because I love you more than I loved her, and I couldn't save her. So what chance do I have with you? Valentina stared at him, stunned. The anger evaporated, replaced by a profound ache for the man standing before her. He wasn't a monster holding secrets. He was a man traumatized by loss, terrified that history would repeat itself. Dominic, she whispered, I thought I was dead. He hurried on, the words tumbling out. I thought I couldn't feel anything, and then I saw you in the snow. And it wasn't because you looked like Elena. It was because you looked like you were surviving. You were broken, but you were standing. She broke. You endured. He released her shoulders and cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. Do not ever say you are a replacement. You are the only thing keeping me alive. The raw honesty of his confession shattered the last of her defenses. She didn't care about the message on the phone. She didn't care about the past. She only cared about this terrified, powerful man who was looking at her like she was his salvation. She didn't speak. She kissed him. It was a collision, a frantic, messy, desperate reclaiming. Dominic groaned, a sound of surrender, and pulled her against him. He lifted her up, setting her on the edge of the desk, pushing aside the wreckage of his outburst. You are mine, he swore against her mouth. You are mine. Valentina, I'm yours, she promised. He didn't take her to the bedroom. The need was too urgent, the fear too fresh. He carried her to the large bay window overlooking the snowy grounds. The storm outside was raging, wind lashing against the glass, but inside, the fire was consuming them. He pressed her back against the cool glass of the window. The contrast between the freezing pain behind her and the searing heat of his body in front of her made her gasp. Look at me, he commanded, his voice rough. She looked. His eyes were black with desire, stripping her bare. I need you to know, he murmured, his hands running down her sides, gripping her waist with possessive strength. I need you to feel it. You are not a ghost. You are flesh and blood and mine. He kissed the hollow of her throat, his hands moving with a feverish intensity, memorizing the shape of her. He undressed her with trembling fingers, not out of clumsiness, but out of an overwhelming surplus of emotion. When his skin met hers, it felt like coming home after a long war. The encounter was wordless and passionate. It was a conversation of bodies, a frantic reassurance that they were both still there, both still alive. Dominic moved with a heavy, rhythmic desperation, driving the doubts out of her mind with every touch. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his breathing ragged, his hands tangling in her hair as if he were drowning and she was the only air. Valentina clung to him, her nails digging into the muscles of his back. She matched his intensity, proving to him that she wasn't fragile, that she wouldn't break like the girl in the locket. When the storm finally broke, leaving them breathless and entangled against the window, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. His eyes were closed, his eyelashes wet. You're not her, he whispered again, the words a prayer into the space between them. You are Valentina, and I will burn the world before I let them take you. Valentina stroked the hair at the nape of his neck, listening to the wind howl outside. She believed him. But as she looked out the window, past his shoulder, into the dark tree line of the estate, a shiver of unease ran down her spine. The walls were high, the gates were locked, but she knew now that the ghosts were already inside, and the message on her phone was a warning that the war wasn't just coming. It was already here. The winter sun hung low and pale over the Vescari estate, casting long, skeletal shadows across the snow-covered grounds. It had been 3 weeks since the wedding, 3 weeks of living inside a golden cage that felt more like a sanctuary than a prison. Valentina sat in the back of the armored black sedan, watching the heavy iron gates rumble open. She had insisted on visiting the local parish to donate winter coats, a small act of normalcy that Dominic had reluctantly agreed to, provided she took 4 guards and an armored convoy. The lead car passed through the limestone pillars. Her car followed. The world exploded. It was not a sound. It was a physical blow. A concussive wave of heat and pressure slammed into the side of the sedan, lifting the heavy armored vehicle onto 2 wheels before it crashed back down with a bone-jarring thud. The windows, reinforced to withstand sniper fire, spider-webbed into a million opaque diamonds but did not shatter. Valentina was thrown against the door, her shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. A high-pitched ringing screamed in her ears, drowning out the shouting of the driver. Smoke, thick and smelling of sulfur and burning rubber, instantly swallowed the vehicle. "Stay down, Mrs. Vescari! Stay down!" the driver roared, climbing into the back seat to shield her body with his own. Valentina curled into a ball on the floorboard, her hands over her head, trembling violently. Through the haze of the ringing in her ears, she could hear the pop, pop, pop of gunfire. Small arms fire. The gate security was engaging. Then, silence. The door was ripped open. Valentina screamed, scrambling backward, but it was not an assassin who reached for her. It was Dominic. He looked possessed. His face was pale, his eyes wide and wild, stripped of all human reason. He had been in the house, had heard the blast, and had run out into the smoke without a weapon or a coat. "Valentina!" He roared her name, grabbing her arms and hauling her out of the smoking car. He dragged her away from the wreckage, his hands frantically patting down her arms, her legs, her face, checking for blood, for shrapnel, for anything broken. "I'm okay," she stammered, though she couldn't hear her own voice. "I'm okay, Dominic." He didn't seem to hear her. He pulled her against his chest, burying his face in her hair. His grip so tight it threatened to crack her ribs. He was shaking. The man who stood like a statue in the face of death was shaking uncontrollably. "They missed!" Marco shouted, running up to them, his face streaked with soot. It was a remote detonation. "They mistimed it by 2 seconds. If they had hit the fuel tank—" Dominic looked up. The look on his face stopped Marco mid-sentence. It was a look of absolute, frozen annihilation. "Get her inside," Dominic whispered. The softness of his voice was more terrifying than a scream. Inside the mansion, the staff moved in a panic, but the library was deadly quiet. Dominic sat Valentina on the leather sofa. A doctor was already there, checking her pupils and her pulse. She had a bruised shoulder and a mild concussion, but she was whole. "It is my fault," Valentina whispered, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. Her teeth were chattering from shock. Dominic, who had been pacing the length of the room like a caged tiger, stopped. He turned to her slowly. "What did you say?" "I'm a weakness," she said, tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face. "They know it. That message said to leave before it was too late. I should have left. They almost killed your men." "They almost killed you!" Dominic crossed the room in 2 strides. He knelt before her, grabbing her face between his hands. His eyes were dark voids, consuming her. "Do not ever say that," he hissed. "You are not the weakness. You are the reason I am still breathing. But they—" He silenced her with a kiss. It was not gentle. It tasted of smoke and terror and adrenaline. It was a desperate assertion of life in the face of death. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. "I will kill them," he promised. The words were flat, devoid of emotion. "I will kill the man who built the bomb. I will kill the man who paid for it. I will kill the man who drove the car. I will burn their entire world until there is nothing left but ash." "Dominic," she pleaded, sensing the darkness rising in him. "Don't lose yourself." He stood up, his face closing off. The husband was gone. The king was back. "Take her to the safe room," he ordered the guards. "No one enters. No one leaves." He walked out of the library without looking back. The retaliation began 3 hours later. Valentina sat in the safe room, a windowless bunker in the basement stocked with supplies and monitors. She watched the news, her hands gripping a mug of cold tea. Dominic had unleashed hell. He had not targeted the rival leadership directly. He had targeted their infrastructure. A warehouse in the South Side, known for moving contraband, was engulfed in flames. A restaurant frequented by the Russo family captains had been sprayed with automatic gunfire. The news anchor's voice was grave. Breaking news from the West Loop. A violent shootout has left 4 dead and 12 injured. Police are reporting that a family of tourists was caught in the crossfire outside the Italian eatery. 2 children are in critical condition. Valentina dropped the mug. It shattered on the concrete floor, the sound exploding in the small room. 2 children. She stared at the screen, at the chaotic footage of ambulances and weeping mothers. This wasn't mafia business. This wasn't soldier against soldier. This was a slaughter. The door to the safe room buzzed and opened. Dominic entered. He still wore the same clothes, now stained with soot and sweat. He looked exhausted, but there was a grim satisfaction in his eyes. "It is done," he said. "We hit them hard. They are scattering." Valentina stood up. She stepped over the broken ceramic of the mug. "Did you see?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dominic frowned. "See what?" "The news." She pointed to the screen. "The restaurant. There were children." "Dominic. Civilians." Dominic glanced at the screen, then back to her. His expression did not change. "War has casualties. Valentina, they planted a bomb at my front gate. They tried to take my wife." "So you killed children?" she screamed. The sound of her voice echoed off the steel walls. Dominic flinched. "I did not pull the trigger," he defended, his voice rising. "My men returned fire. It was chaos. This is what happens when you wake the wolf." "No," she said, shaking her head, backing away from him. "No, this isn't a wolf. This is a monster. You promised me. You said you wanted to stop hurting people. You said you didn't want to be this man. I am being the man I need to be to keep you alive," Dominic roared, slamming his hand against the steel wall. "Do you think I care about the world? I care about you. I would burn this entire city to the ground to keep a scratch off your skin." "That's not love," Valentina yelled back, crying now. "That is possession. That is madness. If you become this, if you become a butcher, then you are just like the men who hurt me. You are just like the man who put those bruises on my ribs." Dominic froze. The color drained from his face. He looked as if she had stabbed him in the chest. "Do not compare me to him," he whispered. "Then stop acting like him," she pleaded. "Call it off, Dominic. Stop the violence. Please." "I cannot," he said, his voice hard and final. "If I stop now, they will think I am weak. They will come for you again. I have to finish it." He turned and walked out, locking the heavy steel door behind him. Valentina sank to the floor, surrounded by the shards of the broken mug. She realized then that the safety he offered came at a price she could not pay. The blood of those children was on his hands, and by extension, on hers. She looked at the wedding ring. It felt like a shackle. She couldn't stay. If she stayed, she would watch him lose his soul completely, and she would lose hers along with him. 2 hours later, the shift change occurred. The guard at the door was replaced by a young man named Leo. Leo had been a busboy at Club Umbra. Valentina had helped him once when he dropped a tray of expensive champagne, taking the blame herself so Dominic wouldn't fire him. He had never forgotten it. When Leo opened the door to bring her dinner, Valentina was waiting. "Leo," she said, her voice urgent, "I need your help." "Mrs. Vascari, I can't," Leo said, looking terrified. "The boss said—" "The boss is going to get everyone killed," she interrupted, grabbing his arm. "Leo, please. You saw the news. Innocent people are dying. I have to get out. I have to make it stop. If I'm not here, the target is gone." "He will kill me," Leo whispered. "He won't know," she promised. "There is a supply van leaving for the city in 20 minutes. Just get me to the garage. Please, for the sake of your own family." Leo looked at her, then at the monitor showing the carnage on the news. He made a decision. He gave her a spare maintenance uniform. She pulled it on over her clothes, tucking her hair under a cap. They moved through the service corridors, avoiding the main halls where Dominic's lieutenants were strategizing the next wave of attacks. The garage was chaotic. Men were loading weapons into SUVs. No one looked twice at the small figure carrying a crate of water bottles toward the laundry van. Valentina climbed into the back of the van, hiding behind stacks of dirty linens. The engine roared to life. As the van rolled past the main gates, past the crater where the bomb had gone off, Valentina looked back at the mansion. It stood dark and imposing against the night sky. She pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. She was leaving the only man who had ever loved her, to save him from himself. The city was cold. Valentina had been dropped off near a subway station. She had no phone. She had left the encrypted device behind, so she couldn't be tracked. She had no cards, just a wad of cash she had taken from the emergency stash in the safe room and the clothes on her back. She found a women's shelter on the north side, a grim brick building with barred windows. It was a far cry from the penthouse, but it was anonymous. "Name?" the weary woman at the desk asked. "Elena," Valentina said. It was the first name that came to mind, the name of the ghost she had replaced. Elena Rossi. She was given a cot in a room with 20 other women. The sheets were rough, smelling of bleach and despair. Valentina lay down, curling into a ball. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but every time she drifted off, she saw Dominic's face, the way he had looked when she compared him to her ex, broken, betrayed. 3 days passed. Valentina stayed inside the shelter during the day, helping in the kitchen, scrubbing pots just as she had done at the club. It felt like a cruel loop, landing her right back where she started, but she couldn't escape the news. The television in the common room was always on. The headlines were screaming about a gang war that had turned Chicago into a war zone. Vascari crime family under siege. Police unable to contain violence. Mob boss Dominic Vascari wanted for questioning. On the 4th night, a breaking news alert flashed across the screen. Attack on Club Umbra. Valentina froze, the dishcloth falling from her hand. The footage showed the club, her sanctuary, the place where he had first fed her. It was on fire. The windows were blown out. Police cars surrounded the block. "They are saying the Vascari leader has lost his mind," one of the women in the shelter whispered. "They say he is tearing the city apart, looking for something." Valentina felt the blood drain from her face. He wasn't fighting for territory. He wasn't fighting for power. He was burning the haystack to find the needle. He was burning the city to find her. She had left to stop the violence, but her absence had only poured gasoline on the fire. She had broken him. Across the city, the penthouse at Club Umbra was dark, save for the orange glow of the streetlights filtering through the shattered windows. The air smelled of smoke and spent casings. Dominic sat on the bench in the rooftop garden. The glass walls that had once protected them from the wind were shattered, jagged teeth biting into the sky. The plants were dead, frozen by the winter air that rushed in unchecked. He was bleeding. A cut above his eye was sluggishly dripping blood onto his white shirt, which was unbuttoned and stained. He held a glass of scotch in his hand, but he wasn't drinking it. He looked out at the city he had claimed to own. It was burning. Sirens wailed in the distance, a chorus of mourning. Marco had told him to go to the safe house. Dominic had refused. He wouldn't leave. What if she came back? What if she came back and he wasn't here? He looked at the empty seat beside him, where they had sat under the stars, where he had kissed her, where he had told her she didn't have to be scared. He had failed. He had become exactly what she feared. He had tried to hold her so tight that he had crushed her. Dominic leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, burying his face in his hands. The king of Chicago, the man who made grown men tremble, let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "You were right," he whispered to the wind. "I am a monster." He looked up at the empty, smoke-choked sky. "Please," he begged, his voice cracking. "Please come back, little one. I will stop. I will stop everything. Just come back." But the only answer was the wail of a siren and the cold, indifferent wind. The elevator shaft hummed with a strained, grinding sound, the only noise in a building that had once been the loudest heartbeat of Chicago's nightlife. Valentina stood alone in the metal box, watching the numbers climb. Her hands were filthy from the subway ride. Her coat was torn, and she was exhausted to the point of collapse, but her heart was beating with a clarity she had never felt before. She had run to save herself. She had run to stop the violence. But in the silence of the shelter, watching the city burn on the news, she had realized the truth. Dominic wasn't burning the city for power. He was burning it because he was grieving. He was a man who had lived in the dark so long that when his only light vanished, he didn't know how to do anything but destroy the shadows that remained. The door slid open to the penthouse. The air hit her first. It was freezing. The floor-to-ceiling windows that had once offered a panoramic view of the skyline were gone, shattered into jagged teeth of glass. The wind whipped through the luxury apartment, carrying snowflakes that settled on the Italian leather furniture and the expensive rugs. It was a ruin, a palace of ice and sorrow. "Dominic," she called out. Her voice was snatched away by the wind. She stepped over the debris, the glass crunching under her boots. She found him on the terrace. He was sitting on a stone bench, his elbows resting on his knees, his head hanging low. He was not wearing a coat. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, stained with soot and dried blood. He looked like a statue carved from misery, motionless amidst the swirling snow. Valentina walked toward him slowly. She was afraid, not of him, but of what he had become in her absence. She stopped 2 feet away. He didn't move. He didn't look up. "You are a hallucination," he murmured to the ground. His voice was a wreck, hoarse, cracked, devoid of the commanding timbre she knew. "Go away. I have punished myself enough. I'm not a hallucination," she whispered. Dominic flinched. His head snapped up. When he saw her, the air seemed to leave his lungs. His face was a map of violence. A deep, jagged cut above his left eyebrow was swollen and sluggishly bleeding. His jaw was bruised, but it was his eyes that broke her heart. They were hollowed out, rimmed with red, filled with a haunting mixture of disbelief and agony. "Valentina?" he breathed. He didn't stand. He looked like he didn't have the strength to stand. She took a step closer and reached out, her fingers brushing the cold skin of his cheek. He shuddered violently at the contact, closing his eyes and leaning into her palm with a desperate, starving noise. "You came back," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Why? I destroyed everything. Look around you. I am a monster." Valentina looked at the ruins of the penthouse, then back at the man shivering in the snow. She didn't see a monster. She saw a boy who had been taught that violence was the only language the world understood. "Come inside," she said softly. "I can't." He shook his head. "I don't deserve the warmth." "Dominic, get up." Her voice was firmer now. She grabbed his hand. It was freezing, his knuckles bruised and bloody. He followed her like a sleepwalker. She led him away from the wind into the interior of the apartment where the heating system was struggling to fight the chill. She took him to the bathroom, which was miraculously intact. She sat him down on the closed lid of the toilet. He sat obediently, watching her every move with wide, terrified eyes, as if blinking would make her vanish. Valentina wet a washcloth with warm water. She moved between his legs, gently wiping the blood from his forehead. He hissed in pain, but didn't pull away. "I thought you were dead," he said, his voice trembling. "When you left, I thought the enemies had taken you. I tore the city apart." "I know," she said, rinsing the cloth. "I saw the news. I killed people. Valentina," he confessed, the tears finally spilling over, cutting clean tracks through the grime on his face. "I went back to the darkness. I failed you." Valentina dropped the cloth into the sink. She took his face in both of her hands, forcing him to look at her. "You didn't fail me," she said fiercely. "You were scared. You were hurt." "I am a monster," he repeated, the self-hatred heavy in his tone. "No," she corrected him, her thumb stroking his cheekbones. "You are not a monster. You are just a man who forgot how to be loved." Dominic let out a sob that shook his entire frame. He wrapped his arms around her waist, burying his face in her stomach, weeping with the raw, unfiltered grief of a child. Valentina held him, running her fingers through his hair, rocking him gently as he purged the poison of the last week. When the tears subsided, leaving him exhausted and pliable, she led him to the bedroom, the guest room where she had spent her first night. It was the only room with the windows still intact. They lay down on the bed where it all began. They didn't undress completely. The cold was still seeping into the bones of the building. Dominic pulled her against him, his grip frantic, his leg thrown over hers to pin her down, to ensure she couldn't float away. The reunion was slow and aching. There was no rush, no frantic lust. It was a conversation of touch. Valentina kissed the cut on his forehead. She kissed the bruise on his jaw. She kissed the scar on his shoulder. Dominic worshipped her. His hands, usually so sure and dominant, trembled as they traced the line of her spine. He touched her face, her neck, her arms, checking for injuries, checking for reality. "I'm sorry," he whispered against her lips, tasting of salt and regret. "I'm so sorry. I know," she breathed back. "It's over. We're here." When they finally merged, it was an act of healing. It was a reclamation of their souls from the fire. Tears mixed on their cheeks. Every movement was an apology. Every breath was a promise. In the quiet dark of the ruined tower, they stitched each other back together. Morning came with a gray, solemn light. Dominic was awake before her. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed in fresh clothes, watching her sleep. When she stirred, he reached out immediately to stroke her hair. "We have to leave," he said quietly. "The police will be here by noon. Marco is holding them off, but he can't do it forever." Valentina sat up, pulling the duvet around her. "Where will we go? To the mansion?" "No," Dominic said. "The mansion is compromised, and I am done with it." He reached for a thick manila folder sitting on the nightstand. He handed it to her. "What is this?" she asked, opening it. The pages were filled with names, dates, bank account numbers, and shipping routes. It looked like a ledger of crimes. "That," Dominic said, pointing to the file, "is the reason I was so ruthless with the Greeks and the Russo family. You thought I was fighting for territory. I wasn't." Valentina scanned the documents. She saw references to shipping containers, manufacturing plants, and human cargo. Her stomach turned. "This is trafficking," she whispered. "Yes," Dominic said, his face hard. "For 3 years, I have been secretly dismantling the trafficking networks within the Commission. I used the territory wars as a cover to burn down their safe houses and destroy their transport lines. That restaurant I shot up, the basement was a holding cell. We got the women out before the firing started." Valentina looked up at him, shock washing over her. "You were saving them?" "I was trying," he said wearily. "I couldn't tell anyone. Not even Marco knew the full extent. If the Commission knew I was the one sabotaging the trade, they would have killed me years ago. But I couldn't be part of it. Valentina, I have done many bad things. I have sold drugs. I have killed men. But I do not sell people." He took the file from her hands and closed it. "This file goes to the FBI this morning," he said, anonymously. "It contains enough evidence to indict every major boss in Chicago, including the ones who attacked us, including me. If they look hard enough—" "You're turning yourself in?" she asked, panic rising. "No," he said, taking her hand. "I am disappearing. I am leaving life. Valentina. For real this time? No more wars, no more empire. The Vescari name dies today." He looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "The marriage," he said, his thumb rubbing over the gold band on her finger. "I told you it was for protection. That was true. But it is not just protection anymore. It is my future. If you want it—" Valentina looked at the file, then at the man. He was giving up everything, his power, his wealth, his identity, to make the world right and to be with her. She wasn't the girl begging outside the club anymore. She was the woman who had brought the King of Chicago to his knees, not to execute him, but to redeem him. "I want it," she said. "I want you. Just you." Dominic exhaled, a sound of immense relief. "Good. Pack nothing. We leave now." 6 months later, the house was small. a white clapboard cottage sitting at the end of a long dirt road in the foothills of Montana. It was miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by pine trees and the silence of the mountains. There were no bodyguards at the gate because there was no gate. There were no armored cars in the driveway, just a dusty pickup truck. Valentina sat on the front porch swing, a blanket wrapped around her legs, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of violet and fire. She held a mug of tea, the steam rising in the cool spring air. She heard the screen door creak open behind her. Dominic stepped out. He looked different. The Italian suits were gone, replaced by flannel and denim. The tension that had lived in his shoulders for decades had evaporated. The scar above his eye had faded to a thin white line. He didn't look like a boss anymore, and he looked like a husband. He sat beside her on the swing, his arm naturally coming around her shoulders to pull her close. She leaned into him, the movement as natural as breathing. "The fence is fixed," he said, his voice rumbling against her ear. "And the garden is tilled. You can plant your tomatoes next week." "You hate tomatoes," she smiled, looking up at him. "I hate eating them," he corrected, kissing the top of her head. "I like watching you grow them." They sat in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the stars begin to puncture the twilight. It was a peace they had fought a war to earn. "Dominic?" she asked softly. "Do you miss it?" He didn't ask what she meant. He knew. "I miss the espresso," he admitted dryly. "The coffee out here tastes like mud." Valentina laughed, a light, happy sound that echoed in the quiet valley. But the rest of it? He tightened his arm around her. "No. I wake up every morning and I don't have to check under my car for a bomb. I don't have to wonder who is lying to me. I look at you, and I know I am exactly where I am supposed to be." He turned on the swing, shifting so he could look her in the eye. The love in his gaze was profound, steady, and stripped of all fear. "You saved me, Valentina," he said seriously. "I was drowning in that city. You pulled me out. We saved each other," she whispered, placing her hand on his chest, over his heart. Dominic took her hand and kissed her knuckles, then her wrist, then her palm. "Do you remember the proposal?" she asked quietly. "In the bedroom? When everything was falling apart?" Dominic nodded. "I was terrified. You said you wanted to marry me to protect me." "I lied," he said softly. "I wanted to marry you because I couldn't imagine a world where you didn't belong to me." Valentina smiled, her eyes shining in the starlight. "You really meant it that night?" Dominic leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, his eyes closing as he inhaled the scent of her. Clean air, tea, and home. "I still do," he replied, his voice a rough whisper of devotion. "Marry me, little one, every day." He kissed her then, slow and deep, under the vast open sky of a free world, and as the wind rustled through the pines, it carried no threats, no sirens, no screams. It carried only the promise of a tomorrow that belonged entirely to them. Thank you so much for listening to The Mafia Boss Found Her Begging Outside His Club. I truly hope you enjoyed the journey of Dominic and Valentina as much as I enjoyed writing it for you. It's a story about redemption, the power of vulnerability, and finding home in the most unexpected places. I would love to hear from you. Please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Also, let me know what you thought of the ending. Did Dominic's transformation resonate with you? If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss an upload. I have many more passionate, intense, and emotional stories coming your way soon. Thank you for your time and your support. See you in the next story.